Hello, my name is C, and we really have some things we need to talk about. I would like to start this video with a disclaimer. I did have other content I was hoping to make. I've been a bit delayed because I'm also studying a master's and working full-time, and I've had thesis deadlines. However, I am essentially rushing this video because I feel it's important that this is spoken about while things are still fresh. So I would like to first make a disclaimer about this video. I know that as my first video on this account, my first attempt at making this kind of content, I essentially am making it so I will never get press accreditation at Eurovision whilst under the current EBU rules and governance and with their current policies. I know this, but this is too important for me personally to stay silent in the hope that I will get to interview contestants at a contest, basically. I'm also aware that I am putting myself at risk of doxing, death threats, you name it, from certain nationalists, we will say. But this is something that I do not feel I can stay silent on, essentially. For me personally, things such as press accreditation are never going to be as important as what I'm about to talk about, because it does involve press silencing and integrity of the press, something that the EBU strives and says that it protects. And it's something I can't stay silent on for different reasons. And so now let's talk about the Eurovision Song Contest 2025. Okay, just popping in here. We're going to have to split the video into two parts because otherwise it is far too long. So welcome to part one. Please remember to like, subscribe, all of that stuff. And part two will drop pretty soon after part one. So stay tuned. This video will have different parts to it, and it will cover slightly different topics, but they all do relate into each other. And so with that, let's start on the first part, which I've already mentioned, and that is that of press integrity and press censorship. The EBU as an organisation is the European Broadcasting Union. It started right after World War II. A lot of people know the history behind it, and Eurovision started not as anything other than broadcasters wanting to see if they could broadcast the same program between them. It was based off Sanremo in Italy, and it was never really political at its beginnings, but the EBU has now expanded. EBU members include Jordan, they include parts of West Asia, they include Australia. It's huge. And it's not just Europe, it's Eurasia, it's parts of Africa. It has a huge span. And one of the things that the EBU has consistently done is it has spoken out to protect journalists and to protect journalistic integrity. I do have receipts for this. So in 2011, the EBU issued a statement where it appealed to the Hungarian Prime Minister to ensure media pluralism. Now, what this means is it made a statement asking for the Hungarian Prime Minister, and this is a direct quote, to be responsive to its concerns about the threats to freedom, independence and pluralism of the media in Hungary posed by the new law, and to pay particular attention to the reform of public service media so as to ensure full respect of public service values, in particular editorial independence and pluralistic governance. The EBU strongly supports the establishment of a modern, competitive, well-funded, independent and pluralistic public service media system in Hungary, and has closely been following developments in Hungary over the past year, participating in high-level meetings with politicians on the subject, However, the letter notes that the EBU is now anxious about the future independence of public media and its capacity to represent the plurality of views within Hungary in the future. So, what they essentially are saying here is they are concerned that journalists within Hungary will not be able to independently report and represent what is happening in Hungary and all the communities within Hungary. That was 2011. They condemned the attacks on the Hungarian-Serbian border in 2015, and this included the following from the EBU Director General Ingrid Deltonra, not sure if I'm saying that right, which is, "We are appalled by all incidents of violence against journalists wherever they occur. All necessary steps must be taken to ensure that they do not happen. We strongly believe in our democratic values and will boldly defend them. Journalists should be free to do their job without fear." Keep that statement by the EBU, by their Director General, in mind. It's important. Keep it in mind. In 2016, there was a conference between the Council of Europe, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, Czech Television, and the EBU, known as the Public Service Media and Democracy Conference. This was to directly address the coup d'etat in Turkey, and essentially what it said was they were concerned about the latest developments in Turkey as a result of the failed coup. And what it says in this is the participants at the conference are highly concerned for the detention of many journalists and the closing of many media outlets. While fully understanding the legitimate need for the Turkish authorities to act decisively immediately after the failed coup, they urge Turkey to respect its commitment and obligations towards the Council of Europe regarding freedom of media and freedom of expression. Again, keep this in mind because it really sets up the idea that the EBU is about freedom of the press, freedom of journalism, and this is something that concerns them when this is limited. So, it's well known that Belarus were suspended and later banned from being EBU members. This was not just in relation to the song that they sent in 2021, which I'm not going to pronounce properly. I believe it's Yanachu Debya. I don't speak Belarusian or Russian, but the statement is similar to a lot of similar statements by the EBU. And again, this is directly quoting the statement. So what it says is, the EBU has been closely monitoring the suppression of media freedom in Belarus and have consistently called on BTRC, as a member of the EBU, to uphold our core values of freedom of expression, independence, and accountability. Since the disputed elections last summer, we have been campaigning for the protection of independent journalism and freedom of expression in the country. We have publicly supported journalists at BTRC who have been protesting against government interference. We have also been monitoring BTRC's coverage and have communicated our concerns to their management. In recent weeks, we have been particularly alarmed by the broadcast of interviews apparently obtained under duress. We have also monitored other BTRC broadcasts on this issue which have raised other serious and quite exceptional concerns. In the light of these exceptional developments, the Executive Board has no alternative other than to propose the suspension of BTRC's membership of the EBU. BTRC will have 2 weeks to respond before suspension comes into effect. The EBU has also condemned attacks on journalists in Georgia in 2024, and the EBU has also called to EU policymakers to committing to safeguarding in Europe's media sector. So protections to journalists and making sure that journalists are able to freely report and express their views on what is going on within Europe. Now, I have the statement on Russia here as well from 2022, and what the statement fails to mention is that Russia did not participate due to the threat of withdrawal from other broadcasters. The statement about Russia ends to say, before making this decision, the EBU took time to consult widely among its membership. The EBU is an apolitical member organisation of broadcasters committed to upholding the values of public service. We remain dedicated to protecting the values of a cultural competition which promotes international exchange and understanding, brings audiences together, celebrates diversity through music, and unites Europe on one stage. Now, the statement the EBU made regarding the suspension of the Russian broadcasters, it doesn't give us much. They don't even call it a suspension or withdrawal. They just said that no Russian act will participate in this year's Eurovision Song Contest. So, with the suspension of Russia, there's never anything to say they were formally suspended. It hints at it in the statement regarding the Russian members, published on the 1st of March 2022. However, a statement from the 26th of February 2022 says they're not aware that the Russian broadcasters were withdrawing from the EBU. They hadn't received official confirmation. This is before they made a statement to say that they were suspending them over what they call the ongoing events in Ukraine. So the EBU calls it a suspension. However, Russia had already decided at that point that they were withdrawing. And I question, is that really a suspension? This I was not going to put in the video. This is really, really interesting, actually. This is from 7th of November 2024. It's not even a year old. It's not even close to a year old. It's what? It's 6 months old, this statement. So the statement on Khan does still exist. It's just somehow buried in the Google searches when it didn't used to be. And what the EBU says here is to protect the value of independent public media, the European Broadcasting Union calls for an end to efforts in Israel to bring the budget of the public broadcaster Khan under direct government control. Khan, an independent television and radio network run by the Israel Public Broadcasting Corporation, is now funded via a license fee charged by the Transportation Ministry and other sources, including advertising and licensing of archive. Khan has criticized the move, saying its current budgetary structure is designed to prevent any political intervention in its content, and the proposed change is another attempt to harm the independence and significance of the Israeli Public Broadcasting Corporation. So, Khan, or the Israeli Public Broadcasting Corporation, it's actually called both. The EBU just calls it Israel Public Broadcasting Corporation for some reason. It came after the IBA, the Israeli Broadcasting Authority, closed. Now, Khan is meant to be independent, but it's not. The EBU would not have issued a statement if Khan was independent. And things like Israeli government intervention have happened regarding Khan and the IBA. So in 2018, there was a High Court decision made to say that the Israeli government would comply with EBU rules so that it could host Eurovision. And that's essentially how Khan has become the broadcaster for Eurovision. Because after the IBA was dissolved, the IPBC had to apply, and because the IPBC's news department was going to be a separate broadcaster, it conflicted with the rules that saw EBU members have to do entertainment and news programming, and this split would have meant that it wasn't possible for Khan to be approved as a member. So Khan is funded by the Israeli government. Now, this is not necessarily revolutionary, We know the BBC receives public money from the government, and the BBC does have government laws around it. We know other state broadcasters and broadcasters have this. But with the context of Israel, this is kind of different, because Khan has become the propaganda machine. We've seen Khan's journalists signing their names on rockets used to be fired at Palestinians. And the level of propaganda that the Israeli media is currently producing is shocking. As in, I've seen the very misleading headline that Israel received the biggest televote ever in 2025. They didn't. That was Ukraine. They didn't even come close to the biggest televote ever. They didn't even come close last year. I think they had a higher televote last year. And they still lost to baby lasagna. But that's the level of propaganda. Now, I didn't read the article. I just saw the headline. Generally, I don't interact with Israeli media sources because of the bias that's within them. They don't provide any facts or journalistic integrity because it's propaganda. It's not facts. And for similar reasons, I try not to interact with other sources, such as Azerbaijani, such as Turkish, such as Russian, because of the bias, especially when I'm doing any research, unless I specifically need to reference said bias. Now I've gone on a slight tangent, so I'm going to go back to an earlier point, which is on the statements the EBU made regarding certain countries. So, as I said earlier, and as I mentioned earlier, the statements regarding Hungary, and I love this part of the 14th of January 2011 statement, which is, and again, this is a direct quote from the EBU statement, which says, "It would be a paradox if Hungary, whose reputation as a country has been one that strives for freedom, should set an unfortunate precedent in terms of the governance and supervision and control of the media and restriction of pluralism." As well as their statement on the attacks on journalists on the Hungarian-Serbian border in 2015, which I know I quoted earlier, but this statement stands out to me, which is that the journalists provide an essential role in bringing truth to society. They should be free to exercise their profession without fear of intimidation and violence. Yet, the EBU continues to defend Khan. They continue to protect Khan, and they have no problem with the involvement of the Israeli government and essentially Khan's employees using their names, writing their names on rockets and firing them at journalists. That does not sound like the EBU protects the freedom of journalism. That sounds like the EBU protects the freedom of some journalists, because we have seen so many Palestinian journalists killed by Israel. This is not up for debate. This is facts. These are not anything other than attacks on journalism and attacks on the free press. And in allowing and in refusing to hold Khan accountable, something the EBU has said when addressing Eastern Europe that it must do and that it must see, but this does not apply to Western and Westernized countries, clearly. And I do think this is important to talk about, because it is not just about Israeli propaganda, because the values of the EU align with Western Europe. The EBU's boards are mostly made up of Western Europeans, not Eastern Europeans. And within this, we see othering, and there is this move away from Western Europe, by Eastern Europe, by Turkey. And then in the light of what this means for Eurovision, well, first of all, we've got Intervision. Russia is bringing it back. They are getting a lot more Russian supporting states, and they're making it more international. They have South America apparently going to participate. I say apparently because I don't think much has been confirmed. It may not even be happening. But you're starting to see the move away from Western Europe and towards Russia again, and towards Turkey, and towards BRICS, essentially. So for those that don't know, BRICS is essentially, it's kind of like the EU. It's a form of cooperation between some of the up-and-coming and leading emerging economies. So it includes Brazil, China, Egypt, Ethiopia, India, Indonesia, Iran, Russia, or Russian Federation, South Africa, and the UAE, so the United Arab Emirates. And the move towards BRICS for a lot of Eastern Europe, it's not surprising. Turkey isn't included yet. However, Turkey is moving more towards Russia. As we know, Turkey supports Azerbaijan, Russia supports Azerbaijan. Russia also does support Armenia. What's happening with Artsakh, I'm not going to get into it right now. So yeah, BRICS. And Intervision kind of symbolizes this move towards BRICS, but it's also a symptom of the othering within Eastern Europe. And Eurovision, we are seeing this too. We are seeing this othering too. This year, when you don't count Israel's televote points, which I think is fair when Spain has said they are investigating them. They're going to be investigating them and how they were allotted and why there was such a big increase between the semi-final amount of televotes and the final amount of televotes, especially the online televote. I think it's fair to discount them until they have actually been verified in terms of where they came from, not just the numbers. I think that's fair. So when looking at that, Eastern Europe got the second highest televote through Estonia and Tommy Cash this year. Last year, they got the highest televote. Don't let people tell you that Eastern Europe didn't win the televote last year, because Croatia did. So we had a Baltic this year and a Balkan won last year. Croatia got a huge televote. Consistently, we've seen Eastern Europe doing well in the televote, but not winning the juries. Now, I do think there are elements in this that relate to the economics within Europe. Essentially, Western Europe does have more resources for artists. There's more money. And in terms of hegemony, there's more for Western Europe. So one of the things I've seen a lot on Twitter is people saying that the high televote points for Israel have come down to the use of multiple SIM cards, multiple bank cards to vote on the ESC vote app, whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure on this. There is a silent minority. There are people who would vote for Israel because they don't care. But on top of that, I think there's another side to it. And that's looking at where voted for Israel and who invests their money in those countries and who goes there for tourism and who goes there for university and who visits those countries, essentially. So we can't deny that there is a big geoeconomic interest from Western Europe with Israel, especially in Germany. And there is Jewish communities. Now, there's Jewish communities, there's Muslim communities, there's Buddhist communities, there's Christian communities, there's communities with no religion. Being a Jewish person does not mean you support genocide, you're Zionist. It doesn't. I want to make that clear. And one of the things I did notice, when you look at the voting patterns, it is Western Europe that is more likely to have Israelis who have moved abroad for whatever reasons, for university, for whatever, and who have businesses that run in Europe, in Western Europe, who have interests in Western Europe, who maybe own property in Western Europe, but also in Israel. And they then have the SIM cards without needing to get extra ones. They have bank cards from different countries and they can use that to manipulate the televote. Now, I can't find the post because I saw it in a Facebook group, but there was somebody claiming that they would get Irish SIM cards and vote for Israel from Ireland because that was a way of manipulating the Irish televote to award Israel more points because they knew that Ireland has a smaller voting base. And interestingly, earlier today, and I'm not going to talk about it right now, I did see posts about how this kind of similar technique and idea has potentially been used by Cyprus. So it isn't unrealistic to think that there are people who are using the fact they have businesses or bank accounts based in Western Europe because that's where their business interests lie, that's where their tourism interests lie, and using those to boost the Israeli vote. Now, part of this as well can be contributed by the fact that they're not spreading their votes between countries. All the votes only go to Israel. So it does skew the televote completely if people are not just voting for one country, but they're voting for three, whilst those who support the actions of the Israeli government, they are only voting for Israel. They don't give any votes to, say, Croatia or Belgium or Finland or Estonia. They only give their votes to one country. So they vote 20 times for that one country on one card. Then they vote another 20 times on another card. Then they vote another 20 times on another card. And that's 20 points from, say, Belgium, from, say, the UK, and from, say, Switzerland. That's 20 votes only going to Israel, whereas someone who didn't like the Israeli song maybe gave 2 votes to Finland, 3 votes to Germany, 4 votes to Sweden, 2 votes to Estonia. You see what I mean? When the vote is more split, because people are actually voting fairly, they're voting in line with what the contest, I guess, kind of wants and is trying to encourage, it means that, of course, Israel is going to get a higher televote because they're having votes piled on them that they really shouldn't be getting. Now, I don't agree that the EBU should be able to track somebody's location. I think as well it means people who are maybe doing an exchange year, people who are living in a different country aren't going to be able to use, they're not going to be able to vote if you were to do it based on location biases or if you introduce some way of verification. What I would like to see is a change in the televote. I've seen some people suggest that it's going to be a thing of you have to vote for 3 different countries. I think that would help. I think adding some kind of verification where if you want to vote online, it doesn't matter where your bank card is from, but it matters that you verify an account with a SIM card with a phone number. And because you can track phone numbers to the country, you can lock it. So if you say you're in the Netherlands, you can only vote with a Dutch phone number. Whereas even if you live in the Netherlands, but say you have an Irish phone number, you then vote as if you're in Ireland still. It's done by your country code for your phone number. People will still get around it. They always will. But I do think something like that would make it harder because it would limit and make it just essentially more time consuming for people to have to verify different phone numbers because you'd have to receive a code to let you log in with said phone number to then place your votes online. And that means the phone number has to be active. Now, a dual SIM phone can hold 2 SIM cards, but you have to activate the SIM card and have it locked to 20 votes per phone number rather than what they currently say, which is 20 votes per bank card, but if you want to vote again with another bank card, you can, which I think is ridiculous. It really is ridiculous that, thinking of myself, if I had a second or a third bank card I could vote, if I used Revolut and generated online cards, I could make 10 online cards and that's 200 votes. Now, I don't even have the money to even think of doing that, but that would be 200 votes for a country. And because, say, my Revolut was opened in Ireland, even though I don't live in Ireland, that's 200 votes from Ireland going to whichever countries, which would influence the televote when you look at how many people vote. And when you have multiple people doing things like that, that's when problems emerge. That's when the televote becomes skewed, it becomes inaccurate. Now, this is also going to cause problems in terms of academic research, because with the rise of the far right have been trying to involve themselves in Eurovision. And for researchers, it's going to make it harder to see how trends are reflected within Eurovision. It's going to make it harder to see what's happening with Eastern Europe and Western Europe and potential othering and exclusion. That's going to become harder because of Israeli propaganda. And yeah, that isn't necessarily a reason, I guess, in a lot of ways, but Eurovision itself is a pretty good indicator as to what the actual people, not governments, but to what actual people like within essentially social policy and where social policy can sometimes be. Eurovision is more democratic than the democratic voting systems within some countries. I mean, just look at how Russia actually gave televote points to Conchita, despite at the time and still having anti-gay laws. And there's been other instances where things like this have happened, where televote points have not necessarily reflected what the government says, but that's going to become an area of study it's going to be harder to find new evidence for if the televote points aren't actually accurate for that country. And on top of that, it's just kind of cheating. And I would argue goes against this journalistic integrity, this idea of free press, of pluralism, of free media, of united by music, when it's just people dogpiling votes and wasting their money voting for one country. And I do mean it when I say wasting their money, because they haven't got a win. It's getting closer, but they haven't done it yet. And I kind of hope this year has scared people enough to realize that this can't go on, because it's media manipulation, it's journalistic manipulation in so many different levels, because even if you are not reporting on it actively, any kind of coverage, it now has become propaganda, because in the televote, Israel came second. And that's now a fact. So it kind of has still become propaganda, even if you're speaking out against it, because this also fuels the nationalist identity and this feeling of othered and this feeling of they are coming for our identity, they're threatening our identity, so we must double down to prove that we are right. And that's what it is. And there is a reason so many people get so defensive over the fact that they voted for Israel and that they thought it was the best song online. And that's because it's not a guilt-free vote. And they know it's not a guilt-free vote. It's the same reason so many Israelis are defensive and are so quick to jump on other people. First of all, they know it's not a guilt-free way of doing it. Second of all, it's because if they don't defend their nation, then they're denying their own identity. They're denying part of who they are. And the whole idea of identity politics runs a lot deeper, but that's part of it, essentially. Apologies for the lighting change. It got dark outside really quickly, and I don't yet have a ring light. Like I said, this is my first video that I've done, and I am kind of trying to rush it because I think this needs to be talked about sooner rather than later. And I guess this was just kind of a thought that struck me, but as I've kind of given the examples from statements by the EBU themselves, they value not censoring media, they value the freedom of the press, the freedom of journalism, yet they tried to censor Spain this year because the Spanish commentators, they made comments and gave some facts about what's happening in Palestine and what Israel are doing in Palestine during the semi-final when Israel performed. And the response of the EBU was essentially to send them a letter, an email, outlining what they had to do in terms of following the code of conduct. Now, when you consider that Israel made some very racist, I would say, comments about Armenia during Armenia's performance, and they didn't get a slap on the wrist, they didn't get a reminder, and instead the Armenian broadcaster just sent their email basically saying, sorry, it was a joke. Well, first of all, that's a joke. We all know those people, those bullies, and we've all had to deal with them. who, when you say, actually, that's kind of offensive, I'm not okay with that, turn around and go, oh my God, it was a joke. Have a sense of humor. I was just joking. Because that's essentially what Khan said to Armenia after their comment. I don't have it in front of me to directly quote it, but it was highly offensive, highly offensive to Armenians. And it did reflect in the televote and the jury vote, because Armenia gave Israel 0, a big fat 0, because of what they had said about Armenians and the Armenian population within Israel. And I think it was specifically Jerusalem. Again, I don't have it in front of me, so I might be wrong on this. So the thing is, this isn't the first time that Khan has made transphobic, racist, homophobic comments about competitors. They did it last year with Bambi and with Nemo and with others. And they had these comments raised, and the EBU did nothing. And this was essentially broadcasters, people who watched at home, fans who raised it with the EBU and put in complaints, and they had video evidence of what was said. But Khan denied it. Khan said they didn't say it. Khan said, no, that's the wrong translation. But it shouldn't have been Khan that investigated themselves, first of all. And second of all, Israel makes itself out to be this gay mecca, this gay haven. Gay marriage is not legal. There is homophobia in Israel. There is clearly a lot of homophobia. But yet they'll tell you it's the Palestinians that are homophobic, and the Palestinians that are the ones that would throw gay people off roofs. And I'm sorry, but I don't think that's their concern right now. And also it shows a complete lack of understanding of essentially what's happening in a lot of more modern Middle Eastern countries. For example, Morocco, especially Marrakesh. You do know that Marrakesh has a thriving gay scene. It's not legal, and it's not something you can sort of do in public. But also, you can't hold hands if you are a heterosexual couple in public. You cannot have PDA if you're a heterosexual couple in public. Moroccan heterosexual couples can't share a room together in a hotel unless they're married. It does not necessarily mean that that country is a country that will kill you on sight for being queer, for being gay. It doesn't mean that. It just means it's different laws. And I'm sorry, but we in the West, we cannot be making comments about how queer rights are protected, and because they're not. They're under threat right now. So there's not a place for this judgment to come from when, I'm sorry, but you're no better in terms of denying rights. And that goes for basically a lot of the Western world right now. A lot of it. And that's just how it is right now, because we are seeing more far-right views and people who feel that being queer is a threat to themselves. Now, this again is a slightly different topic and a slight tangent, but within that, I do feel that the EBU has forgotten who their core viewership is with Eurovision, because it is not the American Zionists. It is not necessarily people who are pro-Israel and people who are pro-genocide. The core viewership is largely more liberal, and it is largely left-wing leaning. They're largely open to LGBTQ rights, and they don't support genocides. That's just what a lot of the core viewership, especially amongst Western audiences, is. And I say especially amongst Western audiences because at the end of the day, Eurovision is made and centered around Western Europe. That's where its origins came from. That's where it's still centered around. And as well as that, the muting of the audience in the semi-finals and the grand final, how is that not also censorship? I know that the Norwegian contestant Tix brought up a very valid point on this regarding that essentially in in muting the audience, you're taking away the voice of the audience. And I have different feelings on this. I do understand why it is done, but I think it has really negatively affected several performances, several qualifications, and it is unfair. There has always been microphones on the audience and audience participation. As a result, I do think some songs are written and they have this audience participation in mind. We saw it with Australia. It had a call and response. However, the response was not really heard. And then it was like someone suddenly remembered, oh yeah, there's a response here. We need to turn that on. It does impact on voting. When songs are designed for an audience response to incorporate the noise of the audience, and that doesn't happen, but it usually happens, it does create an element of unfairness. And if audience censorship, because that is what it is censorship, is something that is going to be used, I think it should be completely optional for each delegation to decide if they want audience to be muted or if they want to hear the audience and the audience to be part of the performance, because that is what it is. The audience is part of the performance. It helps when it comes to televotes. It helps when it comes to the overall show, because you also get the excitement of the audience, and when that is missing, it is not the same. We're not a jury at home. We are fans. We are casual watchers. We are people who just want to watch a fun, campy concert. And so to take away the voice of the audience, that takes away one of the factors that decides on how fun a contest and a concert is, but it also silences the audience, and it does take away from those who cannot be there because they can't afford to, they couldn't get tickets, they're not essentially physically abled enough to be able to attend for the whole show. It takes that away from them. It's unfair to performers that do not know that the audience will not be part of the performance. Therefore, things like call and response in a song will not work. And call and response is something that is used in multiple different songs. And it usually is something that is done not necessarily always for the audience, but it is something that adds to a live performance. We've all seen when the mic is held to the crowd and the crowd shouts back, it does elevate at times a performance, but it also makes it harder for those at home to judge what the reaction is. It takes us out of the idea that we are there, we are watching. But for me, mostly, it's in silencing the audience. You're silencing part of the voice, and you're censoring and limiting this expression, this integrity, this value that you protect. And you've tried to protect in some nation states in Eastern Europe, but you're very happy to silence when it suits and when you think it might harm, I guess you would say, certain investors. So, decided to refilm my conclusion because there has been further developments. Several different broadcasters have now commented and spoken out about voting. They want more full information on the voting. And Spain especially has really kicked off. I don't know what that's going to mean for Spanish participation. They're obviously Big Five. And we'll see how things go. However, I think in conclusion, it's fair to say that there is quite a big benefit for the EBU in keeping Israel in the contest. But it does raise questions regarding the EBU values and what the EBU stands for, especially when looking at the earlier statements about protecting the press and the free press, yet they're not standing for journalists in Palestine. And Palestine was part of the EBU. It was an associate member in the Palestinian Broadcasting Association. It was an associate member up until I think it was 2014. So Palestine was there. It was trying to get membership to Eurovision, and Denmark was helping it with this actually. So it's not as if Palestine and Palestinian journalists haven't been on the radar of the EBU, yet they haven't been protected. On top of that, the censorship of the audience, the censorship of Spain, does not go with the values of the free and independent press. And this is only part of what essentially is hypocrisy. It goes deeper than voting. It goes deeper than juries. It goes deeper than a lot of that, and it goes a lot deeper. There's no conspiracy here. It just simply comes down to who gets their money from where, and why does it benefit them to get this money, and why would they maybe not want to let this money go. It comes down to nationalism, and it essentially just comes down to propaganda and using a contest that claims to be apolitical as a propaganda machine. And I do know there has been certain people making claims recently about the politicization and what this means for countries competing. I don't agree with all of it. I think as a cultural show, any country that's culture is trying to dominate another, because cultural domination is part of what is happening too. But any country whose culture is trying to dominate another, to erase another culture, to erase another identity, has no place in this contest. It is as simple as that. And you can't say it's not political. Spain won. The first Spanish win was done as a way of trying to promote General Franco. So a lot of what we're hearing from the EBU, to me, just sounds like ways of trying to cover their ass, essentially. It goes against what they've said in other statements against other regimes and other dictatorships. And let's not forget that Benjamin Netanyahu does have criminal charges pending against him for corruption and fraud. So let's not pretend that the actions of the Israeli government come from someone who is not corrupt. It is corrupt. The government is corrupt. When your head of state is corrupt, that's a corrupt government. And the Khan is involved. They may not receive direct government funding, except they do. But even if they claim that they don't, and they claim that the journalists are acting independently, they're still acting independently while being paid named, listed journalists with your organization. And if the EBU is going to say that it's apolitical and it's about promoting journalism, well, that also means your journalists and the broadcasters that you allow to be part of your service also need to remain apolitical, and clearly Khan doesn't. And it's not being held accountable for that. It's not being held accountable other than getting a slap on the wrist, which we've clearly seen from what Spain released, about its behaviour, whilst others have been fined. Yolanda was fined €10,000, apparently, allegedly, for her nails. We can imagine Bambi was probably fined as well, or they tried to fine Bambi. I can imagine there'll be others that have been fined. Other contestants from last year have spoken out about how awful the atmosphere was and how they felt under threat because of the extra security only given to Israel. Because of the harassment they got, they weren't able to take a piss in peace. And this is not normal. This is not something we should be promoting, something we should be allowing, essentially. And that's my thoughts on it. I think the EBU has a lot to answer for, and I think the EBU really needs to start using independent investigators when it comes to investigating claims, and I think they do need to really get their house in order, because this is more than just a song contest. When you're something like a broadcasting union, this is also about the press and journalism. So, thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.